The night my heart finally cracked, I was standing alone in my own kitchen, holding a pot of greens that had gone cold. Silence sat heavier than any argument ever had, and for the first time in my 68 years, my own home felt like it didn't belong to me anymore. I'm the kind of woman folks call an auntie, even if we ain't blood. Warm voice, steady hands, wisdom earned the hard way. I raised my son with prayers, discipline, and love so deep it scared me sometimes. I believed if you poured goodness into your family, it would come back to you tenfold. Lord knows, I believe that with my whole chest. My name is Loretta Mae Johnson, born and raised on the south side of Chicago, where neighbors watched out for each other and Sunday dinners meant something. I was a single mother by 32, working double shifts at the hospital cafeteria, feet aching but spirit determined. My son, Marcus, was my miracle, my purpose, the reason I kept going when life tried to bend me in half. Marcus used to sit at this same kitchen table, legs swinging, telling me how one day he'd buy me a house with a porch. "So you can rock and watch your grandbabies, Mama," he'd say, grinning like he already knew how life would turn out. I believed him. Maybe that was my first mistake. When Marcus married Renee, I welcomed her with open arms. Baby, I tried. I cooked her favorite meals, gave her space when she needed it, bit my tongue when her tone turned sharp. Folks don't tell you how becoming a mother-in-law feels like walking on broken glass barefoot, praying you don't bleed too much before you reach the other side. At first, the changes were small. Marcus stopped calling every day, then every week. Renee had opinions about everything, how I folded towels, how loud my TV was, how I hovered. One afternoon, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "We need boundaries." Boundaries. Like love ever came with instructions. I told myself it was just growing pains, that young marriages need space. But late at night, alone in my room, I'd whisper to the ceiling, "Lord, why does this feel like I'm being erased?" The day everything shifted for good was a Sunday. I'd made a full dinner, fried chicken, cornbread, candied yams, the kind of meal that carries history in its smell. They were supposed to come by at 5. 6 came, then 7. No call, no text. When Marcus finally answered, his voice was tight. "Ma, Renee's tired. We're not coming." I swallowed hard. "Baby, I cooked all day." Silence. Then, "You always make it about you." That sentence landed like a slap. I stood there, phone shaking in my hand, realizing my son, the boy I prayed over, was choosing to misunderstand me. Or worse, choosing not to care. Later that night, Renee sent a message. Not a thank you, not an apology, just 3 words. "Please respect us. Respect." I laughed, then cried, because respect shouldn't mean loneliness. Love shouldn't feel like exile. Standing in that quiet kitchen, I knew something precious had been taken from me. Not all at once, but piece by piece. And as I set that cold pot down, a question rose in my chest that terrified me. How did giving my whole heart leave me so alone? Pain doesn't always announce itself with shouting. Sometimes it slips in quiet, sits beside you, and refuses to leave. The morning after that missed Sunday dinner. I woke up with a heaviness in my chest that no prayer seemed to lift. I shuffled into the kitchen, sunlight spilling across the floor like nothing in the world had changed. But everything had. That cold pot of greens still sat in the fridge, untouched, a reminder of love offered and ignored. I pressed my palm against the refrigerator door and whispered, "Get it together, Loretta." Because that's what aunties do. We keep it moving even when our insides are trembling. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed. For a second, hope flared. Maybe Marcus was calling to apologize. Maybe he'd say, "Mama, I messed up." Instead, it was a text from Renee. "We need to talk today about expectations." Expectations. Lord, that word again. I stared at the screen, my heart beating faster than it should have. I typed back, "Come by whenever you're ready." Even though my hands shook, I wasn't ready, not for what was coming. They arrived just after noon, walking in like guests instead of family. Marcus hugged me quick, stiff, like he was checking something off a list. Renee sat straight-backed on my couch, hands folded, eyes sharp but polite. That kind of polite that cuts. "We appreciate everything you've done," she began, her voice smooth, practiced. "But Marcus and I feel like things need to change." I nodded slowly. "Change how, baby?" She glanced at my son, then back at me. "We think it's best if we start living more independently. Emotionally, I mean." Emotionally. I let out a small laugh, the kind you make when you're trying not to cry. "Marcus, what does that mean?" He cleared his throat. "Ma, Renee feels like you rely on me too much, like I'm your whole world." That one hurt deep. "You are my world," I said softly. "I raised you by myself." Renee leaned forward, and that's exactly the problem. The room went still. My ears rang. I looked at this woman, this daughter-in-law I'd prayed for, defended, loved, and realized she saw my devotion as a flaw, as competition. "I never meant to be a burden," I whispered. "Marcus wouldn't meet my eyes. We think it might be best if you start planning for other arrangements. Down the line. Other arrangements, that's how my son told me I was being pushed aside. Not now, not officially, but soon. Someday, when it was convenient." I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and pressed a towel to my mouth so they wouldn't hear me sob. In the mirror, an older woman stared back, strong, tired, invisible. I whispered, "Lord, I gave them everything." When I returned, Renee smiled gently. "We just want peace," she said. "Peace." I nodded because fighting would only confirm whatever story they'd already written about me. They left soon after, promising to check in. The door clicked shut, and the silence rushed back in like an old enemy. That evening, I sat alone on the couch, the house too quiet, my heart too loud. I realized something then. Loneliness doesn't begin when people leave. It begins when the ones you love stop choosing you. And as night settled in, I wondered how much more of myself I could give before there was nothing left. The first morning I woke up and didn't hear my son's voice in my head, I knew something inside me had gone quiet for good. Not peace, just absence, like a room where the furniture's been taken, but the dust still remembers where it was. I tried to busy myself the way women my age are taught to do. I cleaned corners that didn't need cleaning, folded towels already folded, cooked meals my body didn't even want. When loneliness comes knocking, productivity feels like protection, but that protection didn't last long. 3 days passed without a call from Marcus. 3 long days where my phone stayed silent, face down on the coffee table like it was ashamed of me. On the 4th day, I broke. I dialed his number, heart racing like I was the child now. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Ma." No warmth. "No, you okay?" Just, "Hey." "I just wanted to hear your voice," I said, trying to sound light. "See how my baby's doing." There was a pause. Then I heard Renee's voice in the background. "Who is it?" Marcus covered the phone. "Ma, now's not a good time." Something in me snapped. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a quiet final crack. "When is a good time, Marcus?" Another pause. Longer this time. "We'll call you later." They didn't. That night, I sat on my bed holding an old photo album, the kind with plastic sleeves and handwritten dates. There was Marcus at 5 years old, missing teeth, chocolate on his face. There he was at high school graduation, arm around my shoulder, whispering, "We did it, Ma." I traced his smile with my finger and whispered, "What happened to us?" Sunday came again, and with it, church. I almost didn't go. Walking into that sanctuary alone felt like admitting defeat, but I put on my blue dress, pinned my brooch, and showed up, because faith has carried me when family didn't. After service, Sister Evelyn hugged me tight. "Loretta, baby. You okay?" That question undid me. Right there between the pews, I felt tears rise. "I don't know," I admitted. "I think my son's slipping away." She squeezed my hand. "Sometimes children grow up and forget who watered them." That stayed with me. Later that afternoon, Marcus finally called. I answered on the first ring. "Hey, baby." "Ma," he said, exhaling hard. "Renee thinks you've been distant." I almost laughed. "Distant? I've been waiting by this phone." "She feels like you're giving us the silent treatment." I closed my eyes. "Marcus, I'm hurting." "She says you're being dramatic." There it was. My pain reduced to drama. My years of sacrifice brushed aside with one careless word. "And what do you think?" I asked quietly. Silence again. That familiar silence. "I just want everyone to get along," he said finally. That's when I realized something painful and true. Wanting peace without justice always favors the loudest voice. And it wasn't mine. We hung up politely. But politeness doesn't heal wounds. That night, I sat in the dark, realizing old age doesn't start with wrinkles. It starts when your children no longer need your heart. And as I stared at the ceiling, a thought crept in that scared me more than loneliness itself. What if this is how it ends? Loneliness has a way of changing the sound of a house. Even the walls start echoing thoughts you've been trying to outrun. By the second week without seeing my son, my home no longer felt quiet. It felt abandoned. I began noticing things I'd ignored before. The way the floor creaked at night like it was calling my name. The way the clock ticked louder after midnight. As if time itself was keeping count of how long I'd been forgotten. I'd sit in my recliner, hands folded in my lap, and wonder when exactly I became optional. One afternoon, I decided to bake a pound cake. Baking had always calmed me, reminded me of my mother humming gospel songs while butter and sugar became something sweet. I told myself I'd bring it to Marcus and Renee, knock on their door, remind them I still existed. I wrapped the cake carefully, my heart pounding with hope I didn't want to admit out loud. When I arrived at their townhouse, I stood on the porch longer than necessary, straightening my coat, practicing my smile. I rang the bell. Renee answered. "Oh," she said, surprised, not pleased, just surprised. "I baked a cake," I said softly, holding it out like a peace offering. She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Marcus is busy." Inside, their home smelled new. Clean, modern, nothing like the house I raised my son in. Marcus appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands. "Ma, you should have called." I swallowed. "I wanted to surprise you." Renee crossed her arms. "This is what we were talking about, just showing up." My chest tightened. "I didn't mean—" "We need boundaries," she repeated, slower this time, like I was hard of hearing. Marcus sighed. "Ma, Renee's right. You can't just come over whenever you feel like it." I looked at my son, searching for the boy who used to run into my arms. "I brought you cake," I whispered. Renee took it from my hands. "We'll freeze it. Freeze it. Not share it. Not sit down together. Freeze it. Like me." "I think it's best if visits are planned," Marcus continued. "And maybe not so often." That's when the tears came, hot and uncontrollable. "Do you hear yourselves?" I asked. "I'm not asking to move in. I'm just trying to love my son." Renee's voice softened, but her words didn't. Love can feel suffocating. That was it. The final cut. I nodded because dignity was all I had left. "I hear you," I said quietly. I left before my sobs could embarrass me further. In the car, I broke down completely, gripping the steering wheel like it could keep me from falling apart. I realized then that rejection hurts worse when it comes dressed as reason. That night, Marcus sent a text. "We didn't mean to hurt you." I stared at it a long time. Hurt doesn't come from accidents. It comes from choices. Days later, I stopped reaching out, not to punish them, but to protect what little of my heart remained. And in that silence, I began asking myself a question I never thought I'd face. Who am I when I'm no longer needed? The answer didn't come easy, but something inside me was shifting, slow, painful, and irreversible. Some wounds don't bleed. They hollow you out slowly until one day you realize you're moving through life lighter because so much of you is gone. That realization hit me the morning I stopped setting an extra place at the table. I caught myself mid-motion, holding a plate meant for Marcus, and my hands froze. For years, even when he didn't come by, I cooked as if he might. Hope has habits, you know. But that morning, I slid the plate back into the cabinet. My chest tightened, and I whispered, "All right, Loretta, we're doing this differently now." The days grew longer after that. Not louder, just heavier. I stopped calling. Stopped texting. I told myself it was dignity, but truth be told, it was grief wearing a respectable coat. Every ring of the phone still made my heart jump, though. Every single time. One afternoon, I ran into Marcus's old friend, Darnell, at the grocery store. He smiled wide. "Miss Johnson, long time." "How you been, baby?" I asked, forcing cheer into my voice. "Good, good. Saw Marcus last week. He's doing real well." I nodded, pride and pain tangling together. "I'm glad." Darnell hesitated. "He said y'all been busy." Busy. That word again. Working overtime to explain absence. I smiled and changed the subject, but as I walked away, my hands trembled. Even strangers could feel the distance now. It had become visible. That night, I dreamed of Marcus as a little boy, standing at my bedside crying. "Mama, don't leave me." I woke up gasping, tears soaking my pillow. Funny how roles reverse in dreams before they do in life. A week later, the call finally came. Marcus's name lit up my screen like a memory I wasn't sure I could touch. I answered carefully. "Hello, baby." "Ma," he said, voice strained. "Renee and I are hosting Thanksgiving this year." My heart lifted before I could stop it. "Oh?" "She thinks it might be good for healing." Healing. Always after the damage is done. "I'd love that," I said, because Hope is stubborn like that. But then he added, "There will be some ground rules." I closed my eyes. "Go on." "No lecturing, no emotional stuff, and we need you to leave by 8. By 8. On Thanksgiving. I swallowed hard. "Marcus, I don't know if—" "Please, Ma, just for one night." I agreed. Not because it felt right, but because mothers are trained to bend. After we hung up, I sat there wondering how love turned into a list of conditions. Thanksgiving came. I arrived with a pie and a carefully measured heart. Renee greeted me politely like a coworker. Dinner was quiet, controlled. No laughter spilling over, no shared memories. When I tried to tell a story from Marcus's childhood, Renee cleared her throat and Marcus changed the subject. At 7:55, Renee glanced at the clock. "It's getting late." I stood, gathering my coat. Marcus hugged me, brief and awkward. "Thanks for coming, Ma." Driving home, the streets were empty, houses glowing with warmth I wasn't part of. I pulled into my driveway and sat there, engine off, tears streaming. I finally understood something painful and freeing. Being present doesn't mean being welcome. And in that quiet car, I made a promise to myself. I would stop shrinking to fit places that no longer had room for my love. The hardest part about being pushed aside isn't the silence. It's realizing how quietly people learn to live without you. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke up knowing something between my son and me had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I made my coffee and sat at the table, staring at the steam rising like unanswered prayers. No call. No, "Did you get home safe?" I told myself not to expect it, but expectations don't disappear just because you scold them. They linger, stubborn and bruised. That week, I caught myself apologizing to people who hadn't wronged me, to the cashier when my card took too long, to the neighbor when my trash can rolled too close to his driveway. I realized then I was shrinking. Making myself small had become muscle memory. One afternoon, I received an email, not a call, an email, from Marcus. Ma, Renee, and I have been talking. We think it's best if communication goes through me only. It'll help avoid misunderstandings. I read it twice, then a third time, communication through him, like I was a problem to be managed, not a mother to be heard. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I replied simply, I understand, but I didn't. Not really. That Sunday, I skipped church for the first time in years. I couldn't bear the well-meaning questions, the pity in people's eyes. Instead, I sat on my porch, wrapped in a shawl, watching families come and go. Laughter floated through the air like music from another life. My neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, waved from across the street. You all right? Loretta? I smiled the practiced smile. Just resting. She nodded slowly. Children grow up and forget who carried them. Happened to me, too. That cracked something open. How did you survive? I asked. She shrugged. I stopped waiting. Those words followed me inside, echoed through every room. Stop waiting. That night, I pulled out a notebook and began writing. Letters I never planned to send. I wrote about the nights I stayed up nursing fevers, the dreams I put aside, the love I gave without receipts. The pages filled quickly, tears dotting the ink. A few days later, Renee called, directly. My heart jumped before my pride could stop it. Loretta, she said, voice calm, we wanted to let you know we're trying for a baby. I froze. Oh, I said. That's wonderful. We think it's important to set expectations early, she continued. We'll need space, no unsolicited advice, and visits will be limited. I gripped the phone. I'm already on the outside, Renee. She paused. We're just protecting our peace. Peace again. Always peace for them, quiet suffering for me. After we hung up, I sat there shaking. A grandchild, something I dreamed of, now framed as another boundary. That night, I stood in my bedroom, looking at the old rocking chair Marcus once promised to fill with laughter. I ran my hand along its arm and whispered, I don't know where I belong anymore. But something answered back, not a voice, but a feeling, a gentle insistence. You still belong to yourself. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. No dreams, no tears, just rest. And when I woke up, I knew this chapter of waiting was ending, whether they noticed or not, because love doesn't disappear when it's rejected. It changes shape, and mine was about to do just that. I didn't wake up angry that morning. I woke up clear, and clarity can be more unsettling than rage. It was the kind of clarity that sits in your bones and tells you a truth you can't unknow. The house felt different, not quieter, but steadier. Like it was waiting to see who I would be now that I wasn't orbiting around my son's life anymore. I stood in the hallway looking at framed photos I'd walked past for years without really seeing. Marcus at graduation, Marcus at his wedding, me standing beside him, smiling wide, unaware that one day those smiles would feel like evidence against me, proof that I had loved too much. I took the frames down, one by one. Not in anger, in honesty. I wasn't erasing him. I was making room for myself. Later that afternoon, I went to the senior center a few blocks away. I'd passed it countless times, always thinking, that's not for me yet. But loneliness has a way of pushing you through doors you once ignored. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and old perfume. Women laughed at a table near the window. Real laughter, the kind that comes from being seen. A woman with silver locks smiled at me. You knew? I guess I am, I said. I'm Bernice, she said, patting the chair beside her. Sit. We don't bite. Much. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. We talked about children, about aging knees, about husbands who disappointed and sons who forgot. No one rushed me. No one told me to lower my voice or watch my emotions. My story didn't make anyone uncomfortable. On the walk home, my phone rang. Marcus. I stopped on the sidewalk before answering. Hello? Ma, he said, sounding cautious. Renee's been saying you've been distant. I almost smiled. I've been living. He didn't respond right away. We just want to make sure everything's okay. Everything is finally honest, I replied. I'm not chasing you anymore. That startled him. I could hear it in his silence. I never asked you to chase me. No, I said gently, but you let me. That night, I cooked dinner for one, lit a candle anyway, played old soul music and let myself sway in the kitchen. Joy felt unfamiliar, like a language I once spoke fluently but had forgotten. Still, my body remembered. 2 days later, the news came. Not from Marcus, but from Facebook. A post from Renee's sister. Can't wait to be an auntie, with baby emojis and hearts. My chest tightened. So that's how I found out. Not a call, not a conversation, an announcement made public before it was shared with me. I sat there staring at the screen, grief washing over me in waves. Not because of the baby, but because I was no longer considered family enough to be told first. That evening, Marcus finally called. Ma, I meant to tell you sooner. When? I asked quietly. He sighed. Things have been hectic. They always are when I'm the afterthought, I said. He snapped then, just a little. Why do you always make this about pain? Because it is pain, I wanted to scream. Instead, I said, because unspoken pain doesn't disappear, it just gets older. We ended the call politely, coldly, and as I set my phone down, I understood something that hurt and healed all at once. My son was no longer my safe place, and maybe he hadn't been for a while. I went to bed that night knowing a storm was coming, not the kind that breaks houses, but the kind that breaks illusions, and when it hit, nothing would ever be the same again. The first time my son raised his voice at me, something ancient inside my chest went quiet, like a door closing that had been open my whole life, not slammed, just closed. It happened on a Tuesday evening, ordinary in every way except the way it rearranged my heart. I was washing dishes when my phone rang, Marcus's name flashing like a warning I didn't want to read. I dried my hands slowly before answering, already tired. Ma, he said, breath tight. Did you comment on Renee's post? I frowned. What post, baby? The baby announcement. You wrote, Congratulations. I hope I get to be part of this child's life. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I did. That's my truth. He exhaled sharply. Renee felt like that was manipulative. That word again, another label slapped onto my love. Manipulative, I repeated, for hoping. She thinks you're putting pressure on us, making it about you. I felt my spine straighten. Marcus, everything isn't an attack. Sometimes it's just a mother speaking from her heart. Well, maybe your heart needs boundaries too, he snapped. There it was, the raised voice, the impatience, the distance made loud. I leaned against the counter, the cold seeping through my back. Don't talk to me like I'm a problem, I said quietly. You don't see how hard this is for us, he shot back. You're always emotional, always hurt. I closed my eyes. I'm hurt because I'm being hurt. Silence fell between us, thick and heavy. Then he said the words I never thought I'd hear from my child. Maybe you should talk to someone, a therapist or something. Something broke then, not loudly, not all at once, just a soft collapse. So now my pain needs fixing, I said. But your cruelty doesn't? He didn't answer. The call ended soon after, unfinished and unforgivable in ways we both pretended not to notice. That night, I sat alone on the edge of my bed, hands folded, staring at the floor. I replayed the conversation again and again, searching for the moment I became the villain in my own story. I remembered teaching Marcus to say, please, to respect elders, to speak gently. I wondered who had taught him this version of strength that sounded like dismissal. Sleep didn't come easy. When it did, it brought memories. Marcus as a baby, gripping my finger with surprising force. Marcus at 10, yelling from the playground, "Watch me, Mama!" I always watched, always showed up, and now I was being asked to disappear quietly. The next morning, I did something I'd been avoiding. I called my sister Denise down in Atlanta. She listened, didn't interrupt. When I finished, my voice shaking, she said, "Loretta, you're being emotionally abandoned." That word hit harder than betrayal. Abandoned. "But he's alive," I whispered. "Yes," she said gently, and still choosing not to show up. I sat with that truth all day. Let it sting. Let it settle. By evening, I realized something terrifying and liberating. I could no longer survive by waiting for my son to remember me. I boxed up the baby blanket I'd been knitting, not out of spite, out of self-respect. I wasn't going to prepare for a role I hadn't been invited into. As I taped the box shut, tears slid down my face, but my hands didn't shake, because grief had finally made room for resolve. Love shouldn't require silence to survive. And if my voice was too much for them, maybe it was time I used it somewhere else. The silence that followed that phone call wasn't empty. It was crowded with truths I could no longer ignore. Every unanswered message, every careful distance, every boundary wrapped in polite language had finally formed a picture I didn't want but could no longer deny. I didn't hear from Marcus for weeks. No check-in, no apology, just absence. An absence, when it stretches long enough, becomes a statement. I stopped checking my phone so often. Not because it hurt less, but because I was tired of hoping for crumbs from a table I once set. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail, not handwritten, typed, from a lawyer's office. I stood in my entryway holding that envelope like it might burn me. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were papers Marcus wanted me to sign, documents about my house. Estate planning, they called it. He and Renee were just being proactive. Proactive, they wanted assurance, control, certainty, but not connection. I sat down hard in the chair, my knees weak, the house I'd paid for with overtime shifts and aching feet, the house where Marcus took his first steps, reduced to paperwork sent without a phone call, without a conversation, without respect. I called Marcus immediately. He answered, defensive before I even spoke. "Ma, don't overreact." Overreact? My voice was calm, which scared even me. You sent legal papers before you sent love. Renee's voice floated in the background. "We're just planning responsibly." I tightened my grip on the phone. "You couldn't even ask me how I felt." Marcus sighed. "You're making this emotional again." That sentence, again, like my emotions were a habit I should have broken by now. "I am emotional," I said, "because this is my life." There was a pause. Then Renee spoke directly into the phone. "Loretta, we need to know there won't be complications later." Complications. That's what I was now. Not a mother, not a grandmother-to-be. A complication. "I'm not signing anything," I said firmly. Marcus raised his voice. "Why are you being difficult?" I felt something rise in me. Not anger, not sadness, strength. Because being quiet has cost me enough. The call ended badly. No resolution, just frustration and sharp words hanging in the air. I sat there afterward, shaking, not from fear, but from the realization that my son now spoke to me the way strangers speak when they want something. That evening, I went back to the senior center. Bernice was there, along with a few other women who knew heartbreak in different forms. I told them everything. No sugarcoating, no pretending. One woman nodded slowly. "Sometimes the people we raise grow into people we don't recognize." Bernice reached for my hand. "But you still recognize yourself." That mattered more than they knew. When I got home, I did something bold. I scheduled an appointment with a lawyer of my own, not out of spite, but out of protection. I was done assuming love would shield me from harm. That night, Marcus texted, "We're disappointed in you." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "I'm disappointed too, but I'm done being ashamed of it." I set the phone down and felt tears come. Not frantic, not desperate. Clean tears, the kind that wash something away. For the first time, I wasn't asking, why doesn't my son choose me? I was asking something braver. What do I choose now? And that question was about to change everything. The day I walked into that lawyer's office, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else, but my spirit stood tall for the first time in months. Fear was still there, yes, but it no longer had the final word. The office smelled like coffee and old paper, the kind of place where truths are spoken plainly and consequences live on the page. Mr. Harris was a calm, gray-haired man with kind eyes. He listened without interrupting as I told him everything, the emails, the boundaries, the paperwork sent without love. When I finished, he leaned back and said gently, "Ms. Johnson, you are not obligated to hand over control of your life just because someone shares your blood." Something loosened in my chest. I hadn't realized how badly I needed to hear that. We talked about wills, power of attorney, protections, not morbid things, necessary things. I signed nothing that day, but I learned plenty. Most of all, I learned that preparation doesn't mean you expect the worst. It means you respect yourself enough to be ready. When I got home, I found a voicemail from Marcus waiting for me. His voice was tight, irritated. "Ma, Renee's really upset. She feels like you're choosing strangers over family." I sat down slowly before calling back. "No," I said when he answered. "I'm choosing myself." He scoffed. "You're being stubborn." "I'm being careful," I replied. "And there's a difference." That conversation ended the same way the others had, unfinished, unresolved. But this time, I didn't replay it over and over in my head. I let it rest where it fell. A week later, I received an invitation, a baby shower, not from Renee, from her cousin. My name was spelled wrong on the envelope, like an afterthought that almost didn't make the list. I held the card for a long time, then set it down. I didn't RSVP yes, I didn't RSVP no. I just didn't answer. And for once, that silence felt like mine. Instead, I went to Bernice's birthday dinner at the senior center. We laughed until our sides hurt. Shared stories that didn't require permission. Someone played old Motown and I danced. Slow at first, then freer. I felt seen, included, enough. That night, as I undressed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Older, yes, softer around the edges, but still whole, still worthy. The next morning, Marcus showed up unannounced. I opened the door and found him standing there, eyes tired, jaw tight. "We need to talk," he said. I stepped aside. "Then talk." He paced the living room, hands running through his hair. "Renee feels like you're pulling away on purpose." I sat down. "I pulled away because staying was hurting me." "She's pregnant, Ma. She's emotional." I nodded. "So am I. And I don't get a pass." He stopped pacing then, looked at me, really looked. For a moment, I thought he might finally see the cost of his choices. But then his shoulders stiffened. "I just don't want drama around my family." My voice was steady. "Then stop creating it by pretending I don't matter." He left shortly after, frustrated, confused, unchanged. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, heart aching but not breaking, because I understood something now. Healing doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like boundaries that protect what little piece you've managed to rebuild. And as I walked back into my quiet living room, I felt it. The calm before something bigger, a truth rising that would soon demand to be spoken aloud. The quiet after Marcus left didn't feel like peace. It felt like anticipation, like the kind of stillness before a storm, when the air hangs heavy and your heart knows something unavoidable is about to happen. I sat in my living room, hands folded, staring at the muted television, trying to convince myself that I was calm. But calm had left me months ago, replaced by something sharper: awareness. I thought about all the years I'd poured into my son, every sleepless night, every extra shift, every scraped knee and broken heart I'd mended. And yet here I was, older, alone, and constantly reminded that love has no guarantees. That realization hurt more than any argument ever could. That evening, I heard the doorbell. My heart skipped. Maybe it was Marcus again. Maybe he'd come to apologize. I opened the door to find a woman I didn't know standing there, a social worker, clipboard in hand, warm smile but serious eyes. "Mrs. Johnson?" she asked. "I'm Cynthia from the hospital. I wanted to check in on you. There have been some concerns about your well-being." I blinked. Concerns? From whom? She hesitated. From family, mostly. Just routine follow-up to make sure everything's okay. You've been living alone, and sometimes that can be challenging. I laughed softly, a mix of disbelief and sorrow. Challenging. "Baby, I've been living alone for years, and I survived." She smiled politely. "We just want to make sure you're safe." I thanked her, offered her some tea, and sent her on her way. But after the door closed, I sat down and felt the familiar sting of invisibility. My own son, concerned enough to involve someone else instead of talking to me directly. That hurt more than any words. Later that night, I called Denise. My sister always knew when to say the right thing. "Denise," I said, voice low, "they're talking about me like I'm a stranger, like I don't belong to my own family." "Oh, Loretta," she said softly, "sometimes people forget the roots that made them, but roots remember, and so do you." Her words echoed in the empty house, a reminder that even when blood seems cold, love doesn't vanish entirely. I started writing again, this time not letters I'd never send, but a journal, a record of my truth, my experiences, my pain, my love. I wrote about Marcus and Renee, about the boundaries they imposed, about the heartbreak that refused to leave my chest. Writing became a sanctuary. Each word was a brick, slowly rebuilding the home within me that had been eroded by absence and rejection. I realized I had spent so long bending, adjusting, shrinking myself for people who never asked me to, that I had forgotten the shape of my own soul. The next day, I called Bernice. "I need a project," I said, "something to keep me busy." We spent the afternoon cleaning out the community center library, organizing books, making it warm and inviting for everyone who came through the doors. For the first time in months, I felt needed, not just tolerated, not just managed, but genuinely necessary. That evening, as I walked home under the glow of streetlights, I thought about Marcus, about Renee, about the baby. I felt grief, yes, but also a strange strength. If love could be this painful, it could also be this transformative. And in the stillness of my home, I whispered a promise to myself: I will not disappear, not for anyone, not even for my own child. The days after I began writing and working at the community center, something inside me shifted. It wasn't sudden, healing never is, but subtle, like sunlight slipping through clouds after a long storm. I started noticing myself again, the woman I had been before life's betrayals tried to define me. One morning I brewed coffee and sat on the porch, watching the neighborhood wake up. Children ran to the corner store, neighbors waved, dogs barked. Ordinary life in motion, moving around me as if I wasn't part of it. And yet, for the first time in months, I felt grounded, not connected to Marcus or Renee, not waiting for their approval, but connected to me. I remembered a lesson my mother had taught me long ago. "Child, you can give your heart, but never give away your peace." I had spent decades handing out love like it was currency, only to realize that sometimes the people you love don't have enough space to receive it. And when that happens, it's not your fault. It's theirs. By noon, I had plans at the center. We were organizing a holiday drive for seniors who lived alone, folks just like me. I watched the volunteers bustle about, laughing, sharing stories, offering help. And in that room, surrounded by purpose and warmth, I realized something. Love doesn't vanish when it isn't returned. It multiplies when you share it freely, even with strangers. That evening, as I walked home, my phone buzzed. Marcus. My stomach nodded, but I answered, bracing for confrontation. "Ma," he said, voice tentative, careful. "Renee, she's nervous. She wants me to ask if you could—" I stopped myself from interrupting. "Marcus," I said softly, "you don't need to explain her feelings to me." There was a pause. I just thought, "No, baby. I need you to hear this. I am not shrinking. I will not disappear to make anyone comfortable. I love you, I always will. But I am choosing to live without fear, without waiting for approval, without shrinking." He was silent, not defensive, not apologetic, just silent. I hung up and felt tears prick at my eyes, not of sorrow, but of relief. Relief because for the first time I had spoken my truth without bending it into something palatable. Relief because I had finally reclaimed myself. That night, I made dinner for one, like I often did these days, but it was different. I cooked with joy instead of obligation. Fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread, everything I loved, seasoned with laughter and a pinch of freedom. I sat at the table, candle flickering, music low, and I ate slowly, savoring not just the food, but the moment. I thought about Marcus, about Renee, about the baby. I felt grief, yes, and a twinge of loneliness. But that grief no longer defined me. I was still whole. I still mattered. And I realized something profound. Life will not always hand you the family you want, but it will always give you the family you choose. I picked up my journal afterward and wrote, "I am here. I am seen. I am enough." As I closed it, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in years, a quiet, steady strength that whispered, "You have survived, and you will continue to thrive." And I knew, deep in my soul, that no matter what Marcus chose, no matter what boundaries were set, no one could take that away from me. The winter came early that year, with gray skies pressing down on the city and wind biting through my coat. But for once, the cold didn't reach inside me. Inside, there was warmth, a quiet ember that refused to be snuffed out. I had survived months of rejection, heartbreak, and loneliness, and I was beginning to understand what it meant to truly stand in my own life. One chilly afternoon, I took a walk through the park. The children's laughter echoed across the frozen pond, their cheeks pink with cold and delight. Parents shouted, dogs barked, and somewhere, music floated from a nearby window. I inhaled the crisp air, feeling it fill my lungs and steady my heart. Life, messy and chaotic, was still moving forward, and so was I. As I rounded the corner, I spotted a young mother struggling to hold her baby while carrying groceries. The woman's expression mirrored 1,000 small fears I knew well: exhaustion, love, worry. Without thinking, I walked over. "Here, let me help," I said, taking a bag from her hands. She looked at me, startled at first, then smiled. "Thank you. I didn't know how I was going to manage all this." We walked together a few steps, chatting about the weather, the park, the little triumphs and struggles of parenting. I felt a familiar warmth stir inside me, motherly, generous, unstoppable. And for the first time in months, I realized something important. My love didn't have to be confined to Marcus. It could live in the small gestures, the simple acts of kindness, the lives I touched with no expectation of return. That evening, I returned home, cheeks flushed and hands cold. Marcus called while I was putting away groceries. I debated whether to answer, but finally picked up. "Ma," he said cautiously, Renee, she wanted to see you tomorrow." I took a deep breath. "Is this a family dinner or a formal meeting?" I asked, my voice steady. Marcus hesitated. "Just a dinner. For the baby." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "All right, I'll come." We hung up, and I felt a strange mix of apprehension and calm. For months, I'd felt pushed aside, judged, and silenced. Tomorrow, I would enter their home, not as someone shrinking to fit their rules, but as someone whole, dignified, and aware of her worth. That night, I prepared my favorite casserole, carefully packed it, and placed it in the car. The drive to their townhouse was quiet, and I took the long way, letting the city lights flicker across the dashboard. I whispered under my breath, "I am still here. I'm still Mama." When I arrived, Renee opened the door. Her expression softened. No smirk, no sharp edges, just caution. "Hello, Loretta," she said politely. "Hello, Renee," I replied, smiling warmly. "I brought a casserole." Inside, Marcus sat at the table, looking uneasy. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he spoke as if walking on eggshells. But I did not shrink. I did not apologize for existing. I simply placed the casserole in the center, sat down, and joined the conversation with calm presence. For the first time in months, I felt the power of being seen on my own terms. No manipulation, no emotional bargaining, just presence, dignity, and love, offered without expectation. And as we ate, as we shared small stories and laughter that didn't require permission, I realized something life-changing. Sometimes, the family we want doesn't arrive the way we hope, but the family we create, through patience, courage, and self-respect, can be just as real, just as meaningful. For the first time in a long while, I felt whole, truly whole. That night, after leaving Marcus and Renee's townhouse, I drove home slowly, the city lights casting long reflections on the wet streets. The evening had been different. Not perfect, not easy, but different. I felt like a woman reclaiming her own narrative, one step at a time. Inside my quiet house, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the window, looking out at the neighborhood. The world moved on as it always had, yet I felt something inside me shift, like ice finally melting. I realized I had spent so much time waiting for validation, for recognition from my son, that I had almost forgotten what it meant to validate myself. Memories rose unbidden. The nights I sat by Marcus's crib, whispering prayers for his health. The afternoons I spent teaching him life lessons, often at the expense of my own comfort. The years of quiet sacrifice and tireless devotion. I had given my heart without limits, and yes, for a long time, it felt like the world had only returned tears and loneliness. But now, looking back, I could see the strength that love had given me. A knock at the door startled me. I opened it to find a young woman holding a folder. "Hi, are you Mrs. Johnson? I work with the senior community program." "Oh, yes," I said. "Come in." She smiled. "We've been looking for volunteers for a new mentorship program. Seniors like you with life experience could help guide younger parents and mothers who are struggling." I hesitated, then nodded. I think I could do that. As she left, I felt a warmth spread through me, a sense of purpose beyond my own household, beyond the conflicts that had threatened to define me. Maybe my love didn't always return the way I wanted, but it could ripple outward in ways I had never imagined. The next morning, I woke early and prepared for my first day as a mentor. I wore my favorite yellow cardigan, the one Marcus had always said made me shine like sunshine. I took the long walk to the community center, my steps steady, each one carrying a quiet determination. When I arrived, a group of young mothers greeted me, tentative, wary, overwhelmed by life. And as I shared my stories, my laughter, my mistakes, and the lessons I had learned, I saw their eyes widen, not in judgment, but in recognition. They were listening. They were learning. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Love, when freely given, never truly disappears. It transforms, it nurtures, it builds. Later, walking home, I passed a small park where children played. One little boy tripped and fell, and his mother rushed over. I offered a hand, smiled, and watched as they both laughed through the tears. My heart swelled, not for the child, not even for my son, but for me, for the resilience I had discovered, for the capacity to give again without fear, for the woman I had become. That night, I sat at my window again, journal in hand, writing these words. I gave my heart without limits. Sometimes it broke, sometimes it felt unseen, but it also gave me strength, wisdom, and purpose. And that is something no one can ever take away. I realized then that life isn't about being chosen by others. It's about choosing yourself, again and again, even when it hurts, even when the world tells you to shrink. And as I closed the journal, I felt a calm settle in my chest. I had survived rejection, betrayal, and loneliness, and I was stronger because of it. The days grew warmer as spring approached, and with the warmth came a sense of renewal I hadn't felt in years. The house felt lighter, the air sweeter, and my heart was no longer waiting for someone else to return what they had never fully given. I had learned to hold my own love gently, carefully, as something precious that didn't require validation. One afternoon, I received a call from Marcus. My chest tightened, but I answered calmly. "Ma," he began, voice hesitant. "Renee. She wants you to be more involved. With the baby. She thinks maybe you could come over, visit, help if needed." I paused, measuring my response. For months, I had lived in the shadows of their rules, feeling small, unseen. But now, standing in my own light, I realized I had a choice. "I can help," I said finally, "but only if it's honest. No pretending, no guilt, no shrinking myself to make anyone comfortable." There was silence on the other end. Then Marcus whispered, almost inaudible, "Thank you, Ma." We arranged a visit. When I arrived, Renee was nervous, cautious. Marcus looked relieved, but still unsure. I carried my grandmother's old blanket for the baby, something soft and comforting. I didn't apologize. I didn't beg. I simply offered my presence and my love. As the afternoon unfolded, I rocked the baby gently, humming old lullabies I had sung to Marcus himself. I watched Marcus interact with his child, and I felt a bittersweet warmth. This was my legacy, my love continuing, even if it had taken a winding, painful path to arrive. Renee finally smiled, a small but genuine curve of her lips. "Thank you, Loretta," she said softly, "for being here." I nodded. "Thank you for letting me." And just like that, a fragile bridge was built. Not complete, not perfect, but real. Love, after all, does not demand perfection. It asks for honesty, presence, and willingness to forgive, even when the wounds are deep. That evening, I drove home, feeling the kind of contentment that comes from standing firmly in your truth. I realized something vital. Relationships can change, people can disappoint, and children can drift. But the love you cultivate within yourself is unshakable. It carries you when others fail to see your worth. Later that night, I sat by the window, journal in hand, and wrote, "I gave my heart without limits. I was hurt, I was lonely, but I also survived. I learned that love, when true, finds its own way, and I am enough." As I closed my journal, a sense of peace settled over me. Not the false peace that comes from avoidance or silence, but the steady, resilient peace that comes from knowing your own value and refusing to let the world diminish it. I understood at last that life would continue to test me, that old wounds might ache, that my son and daughter-in-law might still misstep, but none of that could take away the strength I had earned, the love I had cultivated, or the woman I had become. And in that quiet, reflective night, I whispered to myself, "I am here. I am seen. I am enough. The morning sun filtered through my curtains, painting golden lines across the floorboards of my living room. I sat in my favorite chair, cup of tea in hand, and felt a calm I hadn't known for years. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't triumphant in a flashy way. It was quiet, steady, and unshakable, the kind of peace that comes when you finally stop waiting for others to define your worth. The weeks leading up to this day had been full of small victories. I'd spent time at the community center, mentoring young mothers, sharing wisdom that had once cost me tears to learn. I'd visited my grandson, gently guiding him through his earliest moments while remaining an independent, confident woman. And I'd seen Marcus, not always understanding, not always agreeing, but beginning slowly to recognize the depth of his mother's heart. One afternoon he called. "Ma, I just wanted to say thank you," he said, voice uncharacteristically soft, "for showing up, for being patient, for everything." I smiled, though he couldn't see me. "You're welcome, baby. I always will be." That night, I sat on my porch, wrapped in a shawl, watching the city lights twinkle. I thought about the years I had given, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the silent heartbreaks, and I realized something profound. Love is not diminished by rejection. Love is strengthened by endurance, and the heart that gives without limits grows resilient, compassionate, and wiser with every test. I thought about Renee, who had once seen my devotion as a threat. I thought about Marcus, who had once pushed me aside. And I realized something beautiful. Even in their mistakes, even in their selfishness, there was a space for forgiveness, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved peace. I stood up and walked inside, flipping open my journal. I wrote the final entry. I gave my heart without limits. I was lonely, I was hurt, I was tested in ways I never imagined, but I survived. I grew, I loved again, I chose myself, and in choosing myself, I discovered that love is never wasted. It transforms, it teaches, it endures. I am enough. I always was. As I closed the journal, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. Not gratitude for perfection, not for people who finally saw me, but for life itself, for the strength I'd discovered, for the love I'd cultivated, and for the wisdom I could now pass on to others. I poured a second cup of tea and looked out the window at the quiet street. Somewhere my grandson slept peacefully. My son's laughter echoed faintly in memory, and I felt a connection that was not dependent on acknowledgement or control. It was love on my terms, authentic and powerful, and I held it close like a precious jewel. At last I understood. The story of my heart was not about betrayal or loneliness. It was about resilience, courage, and the enduring power of love that refuses to diminish, even in the face of pain. And I knew, deep in my soul, that this was only the beginning of the life I had finally earned. The life of a woman who had given everything, received less than she deserved, and yet discovered that she was always, unconditionally, enough. I sat back in my chair, sipping tea, smiling softly. The world outside continued its rush, but inside my heart was still full and free. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I whispered quietly to myself, I am here. I am seen. I am enough. Always.